Welcome to Verified Souls, where the spirits of Arizona's past refuse to rest. Tonight, we honor the memories of those lost to Arizona's most haunted locations through true stories told by the people who live them. These are first-hand accounts that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the places where the dead refuse to leave. I was 31 years old the first time I saw a ghost, and I still can't quite believe I'm saying that out loud. I'd spent 15 years as a corporate event planner based out of Los Angeles, traveling constantly for work, staying in hundreds of hotels from budget motels to five-star resorts. I prided myself on being logical, pragmatic, skeptical of anything that couldn't be explained with science or common sense. Ghost stories were marketing gimmicks, ways to sell more rooms during slow seasons. I knew this. I believed this. Until the night I checked into the Hotel San Carlos in downtown Phoenix. I'd flown in late on a Tuesday evening in March for a 3-day medical device convention at the Phoenix Convention Center. My flight from LAX had been delayed 2 hours due to mechanical issues, and by the time I collected my rental car and navigated downtown Phoenix, it was nearly 11 at night. The Hotel San Carlos wasn't my first choice. I usually stayed at modern chain hotels with reliable Wi-Fi and predictable room layouts, but my usual spots were booked solid because of the convention. The San Carlos had availability and decent reviews mentioning its historic charm and Art Deco architecture. What those reviews failed to emphasize enough was the part about it being one of the most actively haunted hotels in America. When I walked into the lobby just before midnight, I was struck by how beautiful it was. Original 1928 details preserved with obvious care, vintage elevator with brass fixtures, Spanish colonial revival architecture that felt elegant rather than dated. The night clerk, a college-aged kid who looked half asleep, processed my late check-in with minimal conversation. As he handed me the key card for room 714, he paused and gave me an odd look. "7th floor, huh?" he said quietly. "Just so you know, you're not alone up there. People hear things, see things. If you want, I can see if we have something available on a lower floor tomorrow." I remember laughing it off, making some joke about not being afraid of old buildings, taking my key and heading to that gorgeous vintage elevator. The 7th floor was silent when I emerged from the elevator shaft, that particular kind of hotel silence that feels heavy and expectant. The hallway stretched in both directions, with worn carpet and dim wall sconces, casting yellow light on cream-colored walls. Room 714 was at the far end, and my rolling suitcase seemed obscenely loud as I walked, each bump of the wheels echoing off the walls. I remember thinking the air felt different up here, colder than it should be, and there was a faint smell I couldn't quite place, something floral but not pleasant, like flowers left too long in a vase. The room itself was perfectly nice, small but clean, with that same Art Deco charm from the lobby. Original fixtures, a comfortable-looking bed, a window overlooking Monroe Street 7 stories below. I was exhausted from travel, from the delay, from the stress of knowing I had an early morning meeting. I unpacked minimally, changed into pajamas, set my phone alarm for 6:00 a.m., and was asleep within 20 minutes of entering the room. What I didn't know was that I'd only get 3 hours of sleep before everything I believed about reality would shatter. At 2:47 a.m. exactly, I know because I checked my phone immediately, I woke with a start to an overwhelming smell of flowers. Not the faint scent from the hallway, but an aggressive, suffocating wave of floral perfume, like I'd been transported into a funeral home. My eyes snapped open in the darkness, and the first thing I noticed was how cold it was. The kind of cold that shouldn't be possible in a sealed hotel room in Phoenix in March. I could see my breath fogging in the air. I reached for the bedside lamp, heart already starting to pound, and checked the thermostat on the wall. It read 72 degrees, but the room felt like it was in the 40s, maybe colder. That's when I heard the footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth. Not the confident stride of a guest heading to their room or hotel staff making rounds. These were measured, rhythmic, purposeful, someone walking the same stretch of hallway over and over. I sat frozen in bed, listening, trying to rationalize. Maybe another guest couldn't sleep and was pacing. Maybe housekeeping was working a night shift. But it was almost 3 in the morning, and something about those footsteps felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. They sounded too soft, too distant, like they were coming from underwater or through thick fog. I don't know what possessed me to look through the peephole, curiosity maybe, or the need to prove to myself there was a rational explanation. I crept to the door as quietly as possible, my bare feet shocked by how ice-cold the floor had become. I pressed my eye to the peephole and looked out into the 7th-floor hallway. And that's when my rational, skeptical worldview began to crumble. Standing directly in front of my door, maybe 3 feet away, was a glowing figure in white. A woman, young, with long blonde hair, wearing what looked like a rose-colored dress from another era. She was facing my door, facing me, completely motionless, and she was glowing with a soft, impossible luminescence, like she was lit from within. I jerked back from the peephole, hand clamped over my mouth to keep from screaming. My mind was racing through explanations. Someone in costume, weird lighting, a reflection, anything but what I knew I'd seen. I counted to 30, breathing hard, and looked again. She was still there, still motionless, still facing my door. The footsteps had stopped, but I could feel her presence like a physical weight pressing against the door. I checked my phone to call the front desk and watched in horror as the battery drained from 87% to 3% in the span of 10 seconds. The screen went black. I was alone, freezing, with something impossible standing outside my locked door. For 20 minutes I stood there, periodically checking the peephole, and she never moved. Not an inch. Just stood there glowing, staring at my door with an expression I couldn't quite read. The cold intensified. The flower smell became nauseating. And then I heard them, cold spots, moving through my room like invisible people walking in circles around me. I felt watched from multiple angles. Like there were unseen eyes on me from the corners, from the bathroom, from behind the curtains. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I was paralyzed by a fear so primal it shut down my higher thinking. And then the door handle began to turn, slowly, deliberately, from the outside. I watched it rotate a full 90 degrees, despite the fact that I'd engaged both the standard lock and the deadbolt. The door didn't open, but the handle kept turning, and I heard a sound like someone testing the door, pushing gently against it. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor, back pressed against the bed, eyes locked on that turning handle. And then she was there, at the foot of my bed, inside my locked room. I never saw the door open. I never heard her enter. She was just suddenly there, this translucent woman in her rose-colored dress, blonde hair framing a face that was young and beautiful and absolutely hollow with desperation. Her eyes found mine, and I experienced something I'd never felt before, a crushing, overwhelming wave of despair so profound it felt like drowning. My chest constricted. Tears poured down my face without my permission. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't look away from those desperate, pleading eyes. Her mouth moved, and I heard whispered words that seemed to come from inside my own head. It was too high. Too high. I couldn't. Her hand reached toward me, fingers outstretched, and I understood with absolute certainty that if she touched me, something terrible would happen. I would understand her pain completely. I would feel what she felt in her final moments. Part of me would stay with her in this eternal loop of suffering. I must have screamed, though I don't remember it. I don't remember much about the next few seconds, except a sensation of falling, of cold rushing over me like water, and then nothing. When I opened my eyes, pale gray dawn light was filtering through the curtains. I was lying on the floor beside the bed, fully clothed in my pajamas, with no memory of how I got there. My phone was on the floor next to me, battery at 42%, alarm blaring the 6 guys a.m. wake-up call I'd set. And on my arms, vivid against my pale skin, were bruises. Not random bruises from falling. These were perfect, distinct shapes. Fingerprints. Someone had grabbed my arms hard enough to leave marks. I've never gotten dressed faster in my life. I didn't shower, didn't organize my belongings. Just threw everything into my suitcase and ran for the elevator, taking it down to the lobby where early morning light streamed through the historic windows. The day clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, took one look at my face and came out from behind the desk. "7th floor?" she asked gently. I nodded, unable to speak. "Let me see your arms," she said, and when I showed her the bruises, she sighed. "Leone," she said quietly. "That's Leone. She's been here since 1928. The hotel historian met with me later that morning. I'd missed my first convention meeting, but I didn't care. She showed me archived newspaper articles from the Arizona Republican dated May 7th, 1928. Leone Jensen, 22 years old, visiting Phoenix from Los Angeles for health reasons, had jumped from the roof of the Hotel San Carlos at approximately 2:45 a.m., landing on Monroe Street. She'd left multiple suicide notes describing her illness, her loneliness, her despair. "Nervous breakdown, here for lung trouble, too weak to walk, lost appetite, doctors make me sick, have had too many. Just another lonesome and ill stranger," she'd written. The historian showed me a photograph from the time, a young blonde woman in a rose-colored dress. The woman I'd seen at the foot of my bed. For 97 years, guests and employees have reported seeing Leone on the 7th floor, always between 2 and 4:02 a.m., always the same glowing figure in the hallway, always that crushing sense of despair. Some guests report her sitting at the foot of their bed crying. Others find her staring out windows toward the street where her body was found. The hotel historian told me the security footage shows electromagnetic interference that corrupts the 7th floor hallway cameras during the hours when Leone appears. Multiple guests have checked out in the middle of the night with stories identical to mine. I transferred to a different hotel for the remainder of the convention, and I've never stayed at the Hotel San Carlos again. When I travel to Phoenix now, I book accommodations as far from downtown as possible. The bruises on my arms took 2 weeks to fully fade, but the memory of that desperate, hollow gaze hasn't faded at all. I think about Leone Jensen often, 22 years old, far from home, sick and alone in a strange city suffering so profoundly that death from a 7-story fall seemed like relief. Her soul never left that building. She's still there, still pacing the 7th floor, still reliving the moments before she climbed those stairs to the roof. I don't know if she was trying to warn me about something, or if she was just seeking acknowledgement that she existed, that her death mattered, that someone remembers the lonely girl who wrote her own funeral arrangements on hotel stationery 97 years ago. I thought I was the only one who encountered spirits trapped in buildings they died in, but I wasn't. I was 28 years old when I started volunteering at the Yuma Territorial Prison State Historic Park, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that I didn't believe in ghosts. I was finishing my master's degree in history at Arizona State University, focusing my thesis on the evolution of the American penal system in the late 19th century. The Yuma prison was perfect for my research, one of the most infamous institutions in the Southwest, operating from 1846 to 1909, housing over 3,000 inmates during its 33 years of operation. I'd been working there for 8 months, giving tours to tourists, cataloging artifacts in the small museum, organizing historical documents. I knew every cell block, every execution record, every escape attempt documented in the warden's logs. The building held no mysteries for me. It was just history, just stone and iron and faded paint, until the night I stayed late to finish inventory work. The prison sits on a bluff overlooking the Colorado River, and even in the daytime there's something oppressive about the place. The thick granite walls, the tiny cells carved into rock, the iron cages. You can feel the weight of suffering that soaked into every surface. But I'd spent so much time there that I'd become desensitized to it. I saw architectural features instead of torture chambers. I saw historical significance instead of human misery. The other volunteers sometimes talked about feeling watched, about cold spots in certain cells, about hearing voices when they were alone. I dismissed it as overactive imaginations, people projecting emotion onto an old building because they knew its dark history. On this particular evening in late September, I'd volunteered to stay after closing to complete an inventory of artifacts in the museum's storage room. The park closed at 5 p.m., and by the time the last tourists filtered out and my supervisor locked the main gates, it was nearly 6. She asked if I was comfortable being alone in the building until I finished, probably around 8 or 9. I assured her I was fine. I'd been in worse places doing archival research, and at least this building had electricity. She gave me a key to lock up when I left, reminded me to set the security system, and drove away in her Park Service truck. I was alone in one of Arizona's most notorious prisons, and I felt nothing but excitement about uninterrupted work time. I worked steadily for over 2 hours, cataloging old photographs, prisoner intake forms, confiscated weapons, personal effects. The storage room was in the administration building, separate from the main cell blocks, and I had my laptop, good lighting, and a thermos of coffee. Around 8:30, I stood to stretch my legs and decided to do a quick walkthrough of the cell blocks to check that all the display areas were secured before I left. That's when I heard it. A sound like metal scraping against stone, echoing from somewhere deep in the prison complex. I froze, listening. The sound came again, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone dragging chains across a rock floor. I checked the security monitor in the office. The prison has motion sensors and cameras throughout the complex. Nothing was triggering, no movement detected anywhere. I told myself it was probably a desert animal that had gotten inside, maybe a coyote or javelina. The prison has open areas where exterior walls have partially collapsed. I grabbed my flashlight and my radio. We kept walkie-talkies charged in case of emergencies, and headed toward the sound. It was coming from the main cell block, from the direction of what we called the dark cell. The dark cell is the most disturbing part of the Yuma prison, and that's saying something in a building where 111 inmates died, and torture was routine. It's a cage within a cell, an iron box built inside an already tiny granite room with no windows, and a door so thick that when it closes, no light penetrates. Inmates who broke rules, fighting, escape attempts, talking back to guards, were stripped to their underwear, chained inside the cage, and left in absolute darkness for days or weeks at a time. Guards would throw scorpions into the cell as entertainment, joking that the insect's glow would give prisoners a little light. Several men went insane in the dark cell. At least 3 died there, though the official cause was always listed as natural causes or suicide. I'd been inside the dark cell dozens of times. It was part of the standard tour route, and I personally locked it every evening before the park closed. As I approached it now, flashlight beam cutting through the gathering darkness of the cell block, I saw that the heavy iron door was standing open. I stopped walking. I knew with absolute certainty that I had locked that door at 4:45 p.m., less than 4 hours ago. It's on my checklist. I check it every single day. The lock is heavy and old but functional. It doesn't just swing open. I stood there in the corridor, flashlight shaking slightly in my hand, and I heard breathing, not the sound of my own breath, but someone else's. Ragged, labored, desperate breathing coming from inside the dark cell. My rational mind was screaming that this was impossible, that the prison was empty, that the security system would have alerted if anyone had entered. But my instincts were screaming something else entirely. Something was in that cell, and whatever it was knew I was there. I should have left. Every survival instinct I possessed was telling me to turn around, walk back to the administration building, grab my things, and get out. But I'm a researcher. I've spent my entire adult life investigating things that don't make sense, searching for logical explanations. I approached the dark cell, shining my flashlight through the open door into the pitch-black interior. The beam illuminated old iron chains hanging from the walls, the cage in the center of the tiny room, and something else, scratch marks. Deep, frantic scratch marks gouged into the granite walls. Marks I had never seen before, despite cataloging that cell multiple times. The breathing stopped. The temperature dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath fogging in the beam of my flashlight. And this was September in Yuma, where nighttime temperatures stay in the 80s. My radio crackled with static, and through the white noise I heard whispers, multiple voices overlapping, speaking in English and Spanish, words I couldn't quite make out. Then I heard footsteps behind me, heavy boots on stone, approaching from deeper in the cell block. I spun around, flashlight beams sweeping the corridor, but there was nothing there, just empty cells and shadows, and the oppressive silence of the prison pressing in from all sides. I turned back toward the dark cell, and that's when I heard the child's voice, small, frightened, crying out, "Mama, Mama, where are you?" From inside the iron cage, my blood turned to ice. There were children in this prison. The historical records confirm that at least 3 children were incarcerated here with their mothers between 1890 and 1904, but there was no child in that cell. I was alone in a locked prison complex. The security system would have alerted. This was impossible. But the child kept crying, and then more voices joined in, a cacophony of screaming and pleading and praying in different languages, all coming from the dark cell, all overlapping until it was just noise, just raw human suffering compressed into sound. My flashlight died, just winked out completely, despite having fresh batteries. I was standing in absolute darkness in front of the dark cell, listening to the tormented voices of the dead, and then I felt them. Small hands grabbing my ankles, ice-cold fingers wrapping around my legs. Something breathed on the back of my neck, cold breath that smelled like decay and old stone, and then I heard my name. A man's voice, harsh and angry, spoke my actual name, though I'd never introduced myself in the cell blocks, had never spoken my name aloud in this building. "Get out," the voice growled, and the hands on my ankles tightened, pulling me toward the dark cell. Pure animal terror overrode everything. I ran blind through total darkness, crashing into walls, bouncing off cell bars, falling down the stairs that led to the lower level. I scraped my hands and knees on rough stone, tore my shirt on iron bars, and didn't stop running until I burst out through the main entrance into the prison yard. The evening air was still hot, probably 85 degrees, and I collapsed on the ground, gasping and shaking. I called 911 from my cell phone, hands trembling so violently I could barely dial, told them someone was in the prison, that I'd been attacked, that I needed help immediately. 2 Yuma police officers arrived within 10 minutes, followed shortly by my supervisor, who lived 15 minutes away. They searched the entire prison complex with flashlights and found nothing. No one hiding in cells, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of any intruder. The security system logs showed no motion detection all evening except for my own movements, which had been recorded right up until 8:32 p.m. when I entered the main cell block. After that, electromagnetic interference had corrupted all the recordings. The cameras showed static and distortion for the next 20 minutes until the officers arrived. My supervisor sat with me in the parking lot while I tried to explain what happened, and that's when she told me what the Park Service doesn't include in the public tours. Over 111 inmates died in Yuma Territorial Prison during its operation. 29 of them were women, 3 were children incarcerated with their mothers, and multiple prisoners died specifically in the dark cell from heat exposure, dehydration, or suicide. The building's history also includes deaths that were never officially recorded, prisoners killed by guards, inmates who died during punishment and were listed as having been transferred. The director of the park has a file of incident reports from staff members dating back decades, all describing the same phenomena I experienced: voices in the dark cell, cold spots in September heat, the sensation of being touched by invisible hands, and the little girl calling for her mother. 3 security guards have quit over the past 5 years after working night shifts, all of them reporting encounters in the dark cell that left them too frightened to continue. One guard was found unconscious in the cell block in 2019, claiming he'd been pushed down the stairs by something he couldn't see. Another guard recorded audio of what he swears is a child sobbing, though thermal imaging showed the building was empty. I resigned from the museum 2 weeks later. I couldn't finish my thesis research. Couldn't bring myself to go back into that building even in daylight surrounded by crowds of tourists. I still have nightmares about those small hands on my ankles, about the voice speaking my name in the darkness. I think about the souls trapped in that prison, guilty and innocent alike, adults and children, all suffering in a building designed to break human spirits through isolation and darkness. The children had no choice about being there. They were imprisoned because their mothers were imprisoned, and at least one of them died in that hellhole on the bluff above the Colorado River. Sometimes I wonder if my soul would have stayed there with them if I hadn't run, if I'd be another voice in the darkness calling out to visitors who can't hear me. At least those souls died within walls, but some Arizona spirits roam open ground where blood was spilled under the sun. I've always loved old buildings. There's something about the way light filters through vintage windows, the geometric patterns of Art Deco molding, the weight of history pressing down through floorboards that have supported a century of footsteps. As a real estate photographer specializing in historic properties, I've spent 15 years capturing Arizona's architectural heritage: Victorian mansions in Prescott, Spanish colonial churches in Tucson, abandoned railway stations scattered across the desert. I've photographed hundreds of locations, and I've never believed the ghost stories that inevitably accompany old structures. To me, they're just beautiful spaces waiting to be documented before time erases them completely. When Arizona Highways magazine commissioned me to photograph the Jerome Grand Hotel for their winter heritage issue, I was thrilled. Jerome is a photographer's paradise, a former copper mining town clinging to Cleopatra Hill at a 40-degree angle, with buildings stacked on top of each other and panoramic views of the Verde Valley stretching for miles. The Jerome Grand Hotel is the crown jewel, a massive concrete structure built in 1927 as the United Verde Hospital, converted to a hotel in the 1990s after sitting abandoned for decades. 5 stories of Beaux-Arts architecture, medical history, and, according to locals, approximately 9,000 ghosts. I arrived on a brilliant October afternoon with 3 camera bodies, 6 lenses, a tripod, and professional skepticism about the hotel's supernatural reputation. The manager met me in the lobby and handed me an access badge that would open every floor, including areas normally restricted to guests. "Take all the time you need," she said, then added with a slight smile, "Just be aware that the 3rd floor can be unpredictable. That's where the surgery wing was. Highest concentration of deaths during the hospital years." I nodded politely, the way you acknowledge someone's superstition without validating it, and headed for the stairs. The hotel is gorgeous from a technical standpoint. Original terrazzo floors, huge windows designed to maximize sunlight for tuberculosis patients, wide hallways built to accommodate hospital beds. I started on the ground floor and worked my way up, shooting architectural details, playing with afternoon light, checking and rechecking my exposures. Everything was perfect, until I reached the 3rd floor around 4:30 and my camera started malfunctioning. Every photograph I took of the third-floor hallway showed shadows in doorways that weren't visible to my naked eye. Dark, human-shaped shadows standing in thresholds, clustered near the old surgery theater entrance, gathered around what would have been the nurse's station. I checked my sensor for dust, adjusted my settings, switched camera bodies. The shadows appeared in every frame. I looked down the hallway with my eyes. Nothing unusual. Looked through my viewfinder. 3 distinct silhouettes blocking the corridor. The hallway was also inexplicably cold. I'd been photographing in shirt sleeves all afternoon in comfortable October weather, but the third floor felt like walking into refrigeration. My breath fogged when I exhaled. When I checked my phone's weather app, it showed the building's interior temperature as 74 degrees, but I was watching my breath condense in the air. Something was fundamentally wrong with this space. Then my phone's GPS went haywire. Instead of showing my location as the Jerome Grand Hotel, it displayed United Verde Hospital with coordinates that didn't match my actual position, and a date, October 15th, 1947. I stared at the screen, completely baffled. The building hadn't been called United Verde Hospital since 1950, and there was no reason my phone would display historical information. I restarted it. Same result. The phone insisted I was standing in a hospital that had ceased to exist 78 years ago. Above me, on the supposedly closed 4th floor, I heard footsteps. Distinct, purposeful footsteps crossing directly over my head. The manager had specifically told me the 4th floor was under renovation and completely inaccessible due to safety concerns. But someone was up there, walking back and forth, and curiosity overrode my growing unease. I found the stairwell and climbed to 4. The 4th floor was gutted, exposed beams, plastic sheeting, construction equipment, dangling wires, holes in the flooring. Unsafe barely described it. But the footsteps continued, moving toward the 5th floor, and I followed them up one more flight into darkness. The 5th floor had no working electricity, just fading daylight filtering through filthy windows. As my eyes adjusted, I saw old hospital equipment that should have been removed decades ago. Metal gurneys, IV stands, instrument trays, and what looked disturbingly like dried bloodstains on the concrete floor. That's when I saw him. At the end of the hallway, transparent as morning fog, stood a bearded man in mining clothes from the 1920s. He was staring directly at me with hollow, desperate eyes, mouth moving but producing no sound. I froze, camera hanging forgotten around my neck, every rational explanation I'd ever constructed about ghosts and buildings and human psychology evaporating in the face of something impossible standing 30 feet away. He started moving toward me, not walking, gliding, feet not quite touching the floor, getting closer with each second. I backed into what I thought was the hallway, but was actually an old patient room, and the door slammed shut behind me with a force that shook the walls. The temperature dropped to near freezing. Outside the door, I heard the metal gurney rolling back and forth, crashing against walls with increasing violence. Through the door's wire-reinforced window, I saw them. Multiple transparent figures crowding the hallway. Miners, nurses in 1940s uniforms, patients in hospital gowns, all staring at my door with expressions of infinite sadness. One of the nurses pressed her hands against the glass. She had no face. Where her features should have been was just smooth, empty skin. I screamed, backed away from the door, and heard myself screaming but couldn't stop. The handle rattled violently. The door buckled in its frame. And then suddenly it flew open and I ran, blind, panicked, animal terror, down 5 flights of stairs, crashing through the lobby, where hotel guests stared at me with alarm. The manager called the police while I sat hyperventilating in the parking lot. Officers searched the upper floors and found nothing unusual except my camera equipment abandoned on the 3rd floor, which they retrieved. The manager sat beside me as I tried to explain what happened, and she didn't look surprised. "The building's history," she said quietly, is that nearly 9,000 people died here between 1927 and 1950. Mining accidents, tuberculosis, surgical complications, mercury poisoning. The third and fifth floors had the highest mortality rates. That bearded miner. At least 50 guests and employees have seen him over the years. The room you were trapped in was where they put terminal patients, the ones with no hope of recovery. I never retrieved my equipment personally. The hotel mailed it to me. Every photograph from that day is corrupted or shows transparent figures I didn't see while shooting. I'm a professional with 2 decades of experience, and I cannot explain what happened on the 5th floor of the Jerome Grand Hotel using science, optics, or psychology. 9,000 people died in that building on the side of a mountain, many of them miners, far from home, who were buried in unmarked graves in Jerome Cemetery. Maybe they're angry that their death house became a hotel. Maybe they're just lost, still waiting for doctors who've been dead for generations, still suffering in rooms that no longer function as hospital wards. I think about them often, all those souls who climbed that mountain seeking copper wealth or medical treatment and never descended alive. The building remembers every death, stores them in its walls and floors and stairwells. I wonder if the hotel guests sleeping comfortably in renovated patient rooms know they're dreaming on top of suffering. Jerome's history of death runs deeper than one building. The whole town was built on blood. Let me tell you something about being 23 and thinking you're tough. I took the night security job in Tombstone because I needed money for fall semester tuition, and because I wanted to prove I wasn't scared of anything. Grew up on stories of the Old West, gunfighters, outlaws, frontier justice, and figured working overnight in historic buildings would be easy money. Just walk around with a flashlight, check some locks, radio in every hour. How hard could it be? The Birdcage Theater was on my route. You probably know the reputation if you know anything about Tombstone. Operating from 1881 to 1889, 16 different gunfights inside the building, bullet holes still visible in the ceiling and walls, former saloon/gambling hall/brothel, where fortunes changed hands and men died over card games and insults. The place is a time capsule, basically untouched since it closed in 1889, still smelling like old wood and whiskey and leather and something else I could never identify, something stale and wrong. My shift started at midnight. By 1 a.m., I'd checked the OK Corral, courthouse, and Big Nose Kate's without incident. The Birdcage was my last stop before the hour radio check-in. I had keys to every building, authorization to be there, a heavy-duty flashlight, and absolutely zero belief in ghosts. Walking through that front door at 1:15 a.m. on a Tuesday in July, I felt confident, maybe even a little bored. The main floor looked exactly like it always did. Poker tables set up with period-accurate chips and cards, the bar lined with dusty bottles, the stage where performers once entertained miners with cash burning holes in their pockets. Above me, the second-floor balcony wrapped around the space with those tiny cribs where prostitutes took clients, cramped rooms barely big enough for a bed, furnished now with period pieces for tourists to gawk at. I started my walkthrough, boots echoing on wooden floors, checking windows and doors. From upstairs, from one of those cribs, I heard crying. A woman sobbing like her heart was shattering. I froze mid-step, hand automatically going to the radio on my belt. Hello? Security. Building's closed. Silence. Then the crying started again, moving from room to room across the second floor. I assumed teenagers had broken in, some girl having relationship drama in a historic brothel at 1 a.m. Climbed the stairs, calling out warnings about trespassing. Every crib was empty. Period furniture, old photographs on walls. Silence. The crying stopped the moment I reached the second floor. Okay, I thought. Maybe air moving through the building. maybe acoustic weirdness from the age of the structure. Then the piano started playing downstairs. Old saloon music, tinny and distant like it was coming from another room or another time. Problem was, the antique piano on the main floor wasn't connected to power. Couldn't be played without someone physically sitting at the keys. I descended those stairs faster than I'd climbed them, flashlight beams sweeping the main floor. Piano was silent, lid closed, bench empty. But I heard glass breaking in the gambling room, that sharp crash of bottles shattering. Ran in there and found poker chips scattered across 3 different tables, like games had been interrupted mid-hand. No broken glass anywhere. No bottles on the floor, just those poker chips arranged in patterns I hadn't touched. Here's where it gets weird, where my rational 23-year-old brain started short-circuiting. Every single hand laid out on those tables was dead man's hand. Aces and eights, black aces and black eights. The hand Wild Bill Hickok held when he died. The hand every gambler in the Old West feared because it meant death was coming. I'm standing there staring at these cards that I didn't arrange, that shouldn't be arranged because we keep the cards in a locked display case, and my radio starts crackling with sounds that aren't right. Not static, not voices. Saloon sounds. Men laughing, bottles clinking, someone shouting in anger, chairs scraping across floors, and then gunshots. So loud I hit the floor thinking someone was actually shooting, hands over my head, flashlight rolling away into darkness. The shots echoed through the building, multiple weapons, overlapping reports, the specific crack of 19th century revolvers that I recognized from Western movies and historical demonstrations. When I looked up, I saw them. Transparent figures of men in 1880s clothing, vests, suspenders, wide-brimmed hats, standing around the gambling tables frozen mid-argument. One man had his hand on a revolver at his hip. Another was pointing, mouth open in a shout I couldn't hear. They weren't moving, just standing there like a photograph, like the moment before everything went wrong. Then they animated, moving in slow motion, and I watched a gunfight play out in front of me without sound. Men drawing pistols. Muzzle flashes. Bodies jerking backward and falling. Cards and chips flying through the air. Chairs toppling over. But there was no sound now. Just ghostly silent violence replaying itself in the gambling room while I lay on the floor, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to process what I was seeing. One of the ghosts, bearded, maybe 30, wearing a dark vest, turned his head and looked directly at me, made eye contact, raised his pistol and aimed it at my head. I saw his fingers squeeze the trigger, saw the muzzle flash, felt the bullet pass through my skull. Not pain exactly, but ice-cold electricity, like being struck by frozen lightning from the inside. My vision went white, my body convulsed, and then whatever paralysis held me snapped, and I was running, scrambling for the exit, crashing into tables and chairs. Finally reaching the front door and yanking on the handle, locked, from the inside. I had the keys, but the door wouldn't budge, like something was holding it shut. Behind me, the ghostly gunfight continued. Woman's voice upstairs, screaming. More gunshots echoing. My hands shaking so badly I dropped the radio twice before managing to key the mic and gasp out, "Officer needs assistance, Birdcage Theater active shooter," which I knew wasn't true, but was the only thing my brain could produce. Tombstone PD arrived in under 6 minutes, felt like 6 hours, and broke down the door from outside because it wouldn't unlock. Found me curled behind the bar, hysterical, surrounded by poker chips that spelled out "Get Out" in neat letters across the floor. Chips that had been in a locked display case when my shift started. Officers searched the building top to bottom, found no intruders, no signs of forced entry, no evidence anyone else had been inside. The door I couldn't open, working fine, locks functioning normally. The poker chips. They pried open the display case to put them back and found it still locked, glass intact. Tombstone Historical Society director arrived around 3 a.m., took one look at the scattered chips and the dead man's hands on the tables, and told me what I already knew but didn't want to accept. 16 documented fatal shootings in the birdcage between 1881 and 1889. Multiple prostitutes dying in those upstairs cribs from violence, overdoses, disease. Women whose names weren't recorded, whose deaths weren't mourned. The building holds all that violence like a battery holds charge. Residual energy playing moments on an eternal loop. Security guards who work nights report the same phenomena I experienced. Disembodied voices, phantom piano music, cold spots, the sensation of being watched, and the gunfights. Always the gunfights replaying in the gambling room, usually between 1 and 3 a.m. One guard in 2019 was found unconscious in the building, claimed something invisible, pushed him down the stairs. Another quit after capturing audio of a woman screaming and men arguing. Despite being alone inside locked doors, I quit that night. Left Tombstone the next morning. Never went back. Took out student loans instead of earning tuition through ghost hunting security work. 23 and tough. I learned I wasn't either of those things when confronted with something impossible. I think about those men who died in gunfights over cards and whiskey and wounded pride. Their souls trapped in the worst moments of their lives, playing out violence over and over. And the women who died in those tiny cribs, with no one to mourn them, crying for eternity in rooms barely big enough to contain their suffering. They're all still there, reliving their deaths. And I wonder if they even know they're dead, or if they're cursed to repeat that violence forever without understanding why. At least in Tombstone, the dead stay indoors, but in Arizona's mines, spirits linger in darkness underground. The thing about being an experienced desert explorer is you start thinking you're invincible. 10 years of weekend adventures through Arizona's ghost towns, metal detector in hand, hiking boots worn down to nothing, sun-scorched skin that's forgotten what pale looks like. You develop confidence that borders on stupidity. That's what happened to me at Vulture Mine, and I'm lucky to be alive to regret it. March is perfect for ghost town exploration. Spring desert before the killing heat arrives. Wildflowers blooming between rusted mining equipment. Comfortable temperatures that let you hike all day without dying of dehydration. I'd planned this trip to Vulture City for months after reading about its history. Arizona's most productive gold mine, operational from 1863 to 1942, producing over $200 million in gold. The tourist site is well maintained now, but I knew about the restricted areas beyond the official boundaries. The collapsed mine shafts, the glory hole where 7 miners and 12 pack animals were buried alive in 1923 when support pillars failed catastrophically, entombing them 100 feet underground. Their bodies are still down there, never recovered. The mine was too unstable to attempt excavation, so they sealed the glory hole and erected warning signs and moved on. 7 men whose names I'd researched. Family men, immigrants chasing gold rush dreams, working-class laborers who died screaming in darkness and were abandoned to become part of the mine itself. I wanted to find that location, document it, maybe recover artifacts that historical societies overlooked. Respectfully, of course. Always respectfully. The official tour ended around 3 p.m. I lingered near the gift shop until the last tourists filtered out. The rangers locked the main buildings, and vehicles disappeared down the dirt road toward Wickenburg. Then I grabbed my backpack, water, flashlight, first aid kit, metal detector, camera, and hiked toward the off-limits mining areas marked with chain-link fencing and danger keep-out signs. Signs I'd ignored at dozens of locations before without consequence. Found the old shaft entrance after 20 minutes of searching, partially concealed by creosote bushes and decades of erosion. The metal detector was screaming, indicating significant metal deposits deeper in the shaft. My logical brain was cataloging safety concerns. Unstable rock, bad air, no backup. Nobody knows I'm here. But my treasure-hunting brain was louder, more insistent. Just a quick look, just 15 minutes. Just document the entrance and see if any artifacts are accessible without going too deep. The ladder rungs bolted into the shaft wall were ancient but seemed stable. Tested them carefully, started descending into darkness. Flashlight beams showing rough-hewn rock and timber supports that looked far too old to be trustworthy. 20 feet down, the shaft opened into a horizontal tunnel, maybe 4 feet high, forcing me to crouch walk. Air was cold, stale, tasting like minerals and something organic and rotten. My metal detector was going absolutely crazy. Crawled forward maybe 50 feet, finding old tools, rusty pickaxes, what looked like gold ore samples glittering in my flashlight beam. Took photographs, filled my backpack with smaller pieces, told myself this was enough. Time to leave. Then I heard them. Voices deep in the tunnel ahead, multiple men talking in urgent Spanish and English, overlapping words I couldn't quite distinguish. Hello? Someone there? My voice echoed strangely, swallowed by rock. The voices stopped immediately. Temperature plummeted, breath fogging despite March warmth outside. Flashlight began dimming, battery draining impossibly fast. Something moved in the darkness beyond my light. Something scraping against tunnel walls, something breathing with wet, labored gasps. Then rocks started falling, small pebbles at first, pattering down from the ceiling like rain, then larger stones, dust choking the air. The tunnel behind me, my exit route, collapsed with a grinding roar that deafened me. Rocks crashing down to block the way I'd entered. Trapped. Completely. Absolutely trapped in darkness underground with failing light, and something moving toward me from deeper in the mine. Panic is interesting. Your body does things without permission. Hyperventilating, crying, clawing at rocks with bleeding fingers, screaming for help that won't come. My flashlight died completely. Absolute darkness. The kind your eyes never adjust to. The kind that presses against your face like a physical presence. And in that darkness, I felt them. Ice-cold hands grabbing my ankles, my backpack, my shoulders, pulling me deeper into the tunnel away from the collapse. Voices whispering my name, though I'd never spoken it aloud, never introduced myself to the empty mine. The 7 miners who died in 1923 have been alone in absolute darkness for over a century. Their bodies rotted, their names forgotten except in historical records nobody reads, their families long dead. They've been waiting in that darkness, and now they had company. Now someone had joined them in their tomb, and they weren't letting me leave. I felt their desperation, their loneliness, their rage at being abandoned and forgotten. They wrapped around me like water, invisible but present, pulling me toward the glory hole where their bones lay scattered among broken machinery. Something in my brain snapped. Survival instinct overriding terror, I thrashed against the invisible hands, dropped my backpack to reduce weight, and crawled blindly feeling for any gap in the rockfall. Rocks shifted above me, small pieces raining down, tunnel groaning like it wanted to collapse entirely and add me to the death toll. My fingers found space, barely 6 inches, impossibly small but space nonetheless, squeezed my body into that gap, ignoring skin tearing on sharp rocks, ignoring ribs compressing painfully, ignoring rational understanding that humans don't fit through 6-inch openings. Terror makes you flexible. Adrenaline makes you strong. I pulled myself through that impossible space, squeezing through rock that should have crushed me, emerging on the other side with torn clothes and bleeding arms and no memory of how I actually managed it. Crawled back through the horizontal tunnel, climbed the shaft ladder with shaking limbs, burst out into late afternoon sunlight that felt like heaven itself, collapsed in the dirt gasping and sobbing. Rangers found me 2 hours later, dehydrated and incoherent, still lying near the shaft entrance. Cited me for trespassing, fined me $500, called an ambulance because I looked like I'd been mauled by a mountain lion. At the hospital, they couldn't explain the bruises on my ankles shaped like handprints. Couldn't explain how I'd squeezed through a collapse that structural engineers later said was impossible to survive. Park officials confirmed the shaft I entered connects to the glory hole area where the 1923 collapse occurred. Geologists said the tunnel system is catastrophically unstable, that my presence likely triggered the rockfall, that I should have died. My backpack, metal detector, and camera are still down there. I refused to go back for them, refused to even look at the mine entrance when police took my statement. I don't explore abandoned mines anymore. The $500 fine was worth my life. Worth never feeling those ice-cold hands again, or hearing my name whispered by voices that shouldn't exist. Those 7 miners are still entombed in the glory hole, still waiting in darkness, still desperate for company after 100 years of absolute isolation. Their families never got closure, never had bodies to bury, never got justice for the mining company's negligence that killed them. Their souls are trapped in that mountain, and they're not at peace, and they're lonely in a way that transcends death. Sometimes I wake up feeling those hands on my ankles and hearing them whisper my name, and I wonder if part of my soul stayed down there with them in the darkness. Some souls die trapped underground, but others die under open sky where mountains swallow them whole. Listen, I know what you're thinking. How does an experienced hiker from Colorado get lost in Arizona mountains? Fair question. I've summited 14,000-foot peaks, navigated whiteouts above tree line, crossed rivers swollen with snowmelt. Mountains are my territory, my expertise, the one place I feel completely in control. Or they were, until November, when I decided the Superstition Mountains would be an easy warm-up hike during my Phoenix vacation. Arrogance gets people killed in the desert. I know that now. The trailhead parking lot at Lost Dutchman State Park was nearly empty when I arrived at 7 a.m., which should have been my first warning. November is peak hiking season in Arizona. Comfortable temperatures, clear skies, perfect conditions. But locals avoid the superstitions for reasons that have nothing to do with weather. They know the mountain's reputation. Dozens of people disappearing while searching for the legendary Lost Dutchman's mine. Over 600 documented deaths and disappearances since the 1800s. Apache legends about death curses protecting sacred land. Tourist brochures call it folklore. Search and rescue teams call it statistics. I dismissed both as superstition, ironic, given the mountain range's name. Loaded my pack with 3 liters of water, GPS unit, satellite emergency beacon, trail snacks, first aid kit. Started up the Peralta Trail feeling invincible in my expensive hiking boots and moisture-wicking gear designed for Colorado altitude. The desert couldn't touch me. Mountains were mountains, regardless of geography. By noon, everything went wrong. The trail became unclear. Cairns spaced too far apart. Multiple use paths branching in different directions. Vegetation obscuring the main route. My GPS unit showed my position as impossible coordinates, placing me 200 miles northeast near the Grand Canyon, despite clearly being in the superstitions. Phone service vanished. The satellite beacon screen flickered with error messages I'd never seen in 5 years of backcountry use. Then I saw my own boot prints in the dirt ahead of me. Fresh impressions, distinct tread pattern matching my Salomon hiking boots exactly, leading deeper into a canyon I didn't remember entering. But I hadn't walked in circles. The terrain was unfamiliar. The rock formations alien. Someone else must be wearing the same boots, same size, making the same route choices. Coincidence. Had to be coincidence. I followed those prints anyway, trying to find where I'd gone wrong, where the route diverged from my intended path. They led me to a cave entrance partially hidden by Palo Verde trees and jumping cholla. Inside, weathered backpack covered in dust, broken hiking boot with the sole detached, and bones. Human bones scattered across the cave floor like discarded puzzle pieces. Skull positioned against the back wall with a circular hole through the right temple. My stomach dropped. This person died here. Violence or accident. Impossible to tell, and nobody found them. Nobody recovered the body. They're still here, unnamed, unmourned, becoming part of the mountain one season at a time. I backed out of that cave fast, pulse hammering in my throat, and realized with crystalline clarity that I was completely, utterly lost. The mountains looked identical in every direction, jagged peaks, saguaro-studded slopes, volcanic rock formations that could be landmarks or could be anywhere. 6 hours of daylight remained. I had water and emergency supplies. Stay calm, backtrack, find the trail. Help me, please. I'm lost. The voice came from deeper in the canyon, male, desperate, echoing off rock walls. Another hiker in trouble. I called back. Where are you? Keep talking. Started moving toward the voice, thinking only about rescue, about helping someone more lost than me. The voice got closer, but I never saw anyone. Just heard it bouncing between boulders and scrub brush, leading me deeper into the labyrinth of canyons. Then the voice changed, stopped calling for help, and started laughing. Low, cruel, inhuman laughter that multiplied into dozens of voices, echoing from impossible directions. I was running then, crashing through catclaw acacia that tore my skin, stumbling over rocks, and suddenly the ground disappeared beneath my feet. Fell 15 feet into a crevice between massive boulders, landing hard enough to crack my ankle, wedging myself in a space barely wider than my shoulders, trapped. The sky above reduced to a narrow strip of blue that darkened rapidly as sunset approached. Temperature dropping from comfortable to cold, desert nights stealing heat fast. I screamed until my throat bled, knowing nobody could hear, knowing I'd made every mistake that kills people in these mountains. Above me, something moved, rocks scraping, breathing that wasn't wind, a shadow passing over the opening of my rock prison, circling, watching, waiting for me to die like the person in the cave died, like 600 others died in these cursed mountains. I sent text messages to my family that wouldn't transmit without signal. Wrote goodbye notes in my phone, prayed to gods I don't believe in. Hypothermia set in around 3 a.m., shivering so violently my teeth cracked together, hallucinating my mother's voice, seeing lights that weren't there. Passed out expecting to wake up dead or not wake up at all. The helicopter spotted me at dawn, search and rescue responding to a satellite beacon signal my device somehow transmitted despite being malfunctioning. Ground team extracted me with ropes and backboards, treating a broken ankle and severe dehydration. The ranger who carried me out couldn't look me in the eye when he told me the truth. I'd been found 0.3 miles from the Peralta Trailhead parking lot. I'd walked in massive circles for 12 hours, staying near the beginning of the trail the entire time, though I'd felt like I'd penetrated miles deep into the wilderness. The bones in the cave were confirmed through dental records as belonging to someone who disappeared in 2009 searching for the lost Dutchman's mine, found in 2012 but apparently not fully recovered. The ranger showed me statistics I didn't want to see. Over 600 people dead or missing in the superstitions since the 1800s. Experienced hikers, prepared survivalists, people who knew mountains and deserts and navigation. The land itself plays with people, creates acoustic anomalies that mimic voices, generates magnetic interference that destroys GPS accuracy, produces optical illusions that make familiar terrain unrecognizable. Or maybe the Apache death curse is real. Maybe the mountains are protected by something that doesn't want visitors, something that leads people in circles until they die from exposure or fall into crevices, or simply vanish into desert air. The ranger mentioned they find bodies years later in places they'd searched thoroughly, as if the mountains hide victims until they're ready to release them. I'll never hike Arizona mountains again. My broken ankle healed in 8 weeks, but the psychological damage is permanent. I hear those laughing voices in my nightmares, feel the cold rock pressing against my ribs. See that skull with the bullet hole watching me from the darkness. 600 souls still wander those mountains, their voices calling to new victims, their bones scattered in caves and canyons that shift and hide from searchers. Sometimes I wonder if part of my soul stayed trapped in that crevice, if something in the superstitions kept a piece of me as payment for letting me escape alive. At least I escaped the mountains alive, but some people never make it out of the desert at all. The thing about being a travel writer is you develop a healthy skepticism toward hotels that advertise their haunted history. Every establishment built before 1950 claims ghosts in the marketing materials. Phantom footsteps, mysterious cold spots, ladies in white drifting through corridors. It's branding, it's differentiation in a saturated hospitality market. It's rarely based on anything more substantial than creaky floorboards and overactive imaginations. That's what I believed when my editor at New York Travel Magazine assigned me to cover Arizona's most haunted historic hotels. I was planning to write an exposé piece. The Ghost Story Industrial Complex, How Hotels Manufacture Hauntings for Tourist Dollars. I'd stay in the allegedly haunted rooms, document the lack of paranormal activity, interview staff about how they perpetuate the myths, and reveal the whole thing as clever marketing. Cynical, absolutely, but also journalistically sound. The Copper Queen Hotel in Bisbee was first on my list. Built in 1902 during the copper mining boom, supposedly one of the most actively haunted hotels in Arizona, with a particular focus on room 426, the Grand Balcony Suite, where a prostitute named Faith allegedly committed suicide in the early 1900s after being abandoned by a client who'd promised to marry her. Guests report flower smells, foot massages from invisible hands, cold spots, and apparitions of a woman in a rose-colored dress. Classic ghost story beats. Too perfect to be real. I specifically requested room 426 when I called for reservations, telling the front desk agent I wanted the full haunted experience. She hesitated noticeably before confirming the booking, asked if I'd prefer a different room just to be safe, which I found amusing. The commitment to the ghost story narrative was impressive. Even the staff played along. Arrived in Bisbee on a Tuesday evening in May, driving up the winding mountain roads past century-old mining structures and Victorian houses stacked against hillsides. The hotel itself is beautiful. Red brick, 4 stories, original architectural details preserved with obvious care. Checked in around 9 p.m., the night clerk glancing at my key and saying quietly, "Room 426. Are you sure?" I assured him I was researching an article, that I didn't believe in ghosts, that I'd be perfectly fine. He nodded slowly and wished me luck in a tone that suggested I'd need it. Room 426 exceeded expectations aesthetically. High ceilings, period furniture, balcony overlooking Bisbee's historic downtown, brass fixtures, vintage wallpaper. Beautiful space. I unpacked my laptop, recording equipment, camera, and settled in to work on article drafts while waiting for absolutely nothing supernatural to occur. The plan was simple: document a completely ordinary night, prove the ghost story was fabricated, publish the truth. Around 11:30, while typing notes about marketing tactics and confirmation bias, I smelled flowers. Not perfume. Actual flowers. Overwhelming and intense, like walking into a florist shop. I checked the room for air fresheners, scent diffusers, anything that might explain the smell. Nothing. Checked the balcony thinking maybe flowering plants outside. Wrong season, wrong climate. The smell intensified, became almost nauseating in its sweetness, and my feet began tingling. Not pain, not numbness, tingling like someone was touching them through the bedsheets. Gentle pressure, moving from heels to toes like a massage. I jerked my feet away, stood up, examined the bed for mechanical devices or hidden vibrating mechanisms. Nothing. Pulled back all the bedding, thinking maybe something was embedded in the mattress. Nothing. Sat back down. The tingling returned immediately. Unmistakable pressure on both feet simultaneously. My skepticism was fighting against sensory input that didn't make rational sense. Exhaustion, I decided. Long drive. Altitude change. Power of suggestion working on a tired brain. I'd sleep it off. Wake up refreshed. Laugh about how I'd almost fallen for the hotel's atmospheric manipulation. Turned off lights around midnight, climbed into bed, closed my eyes. Woke at 2 a.m. exactly to a woman standing at the foot of my bed. Young, maybe mid-20s, long dark hair, wearing an old-fashioned rose-colored dress with high collar and long sleeves. She was staring at me with the saddest eyes I've ever seen, expression full of loneliness and longing and something desperate. I screamed, lunged for the bedside lamp, flooded the room with light. Nobody there. But the depression in the mattress where she'd stood was visible, clearly defined, as if someone had just stepped off the bed. Rose petals were scattered across the floor. Pink, fresh, still moist, like they'd just been cut. They hadn't been there when I went to sleep. I photographed them with shaking hands, grabbed my phone to call the front desk, and noticed the mirror. In the reflection behind me, the woman in the rose dress stood perfectly still, watching me. I spun around, nobody there. Looked back at mirror. She was still visible in the reflection, mouth moving like she was speaking, though no sound emerged. Cold spots moved through the room, like invisible people walking, temperature dropping dramatically despite May warmth. I could see my breath, could feel the flower smell intensifying, could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears while I tried to rationalize what I was experiencing using psychology, neuroscience, anything scientific. Then the bathroom door slammed. Water began running in the bathtub. I could hear it clearly, water hitting porcelain, steam beginning to rise. I hadn't turned on any water. Approached the bathroom slowly, pushed open the door with my foot, saw the tub filling itself with hot water, while steam fogged the mirror above the sink. In that steam-fogged mirror, words appeared letter by letter, as if someone was writing with their finger. It hurt. 2 words that destroyed my skepticism entirely. The lights flickered once, twice, died completely. Absolute darkness in an unfamiliar room, with water running and invisible hands touching me, and a dead woman writing messages in steam, hands wrapped around my throat from behind. Cold, desperate, squeezing. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, couldn't move. The entity was choking me with impossible strength, and I understood suddenly, with horrible clarity, that I was experiencing how Faith died, strangling, suffocating, dying alone in this exact room over a century ago. She was showing me her death, making me feel it, sharing the pain she'd carried for generations. I clawed at invisible hands, crashed backward into furniture, finally broke free gasping. Ran into the hallway, pounding on doors, screaming for help, not caring about professionalism or journalism or anything except escape. Hotel security arrived within minutes, found me sobbing and hyperventilating with red marks on my throat in the perfect shape of fingerprints. Marks I couldn't have made myself. Marks that photographed clearly under their flashlights. They moved me to a different room without question, without surprise, with the practiced efficiency of staff who've handled this scenario multiple times. The manager sat with me until dawn, explaining what staff never tell guests during check-in. Faith's documented suicide in room 426 in the early 1900s. Over 100 years of consistent paranormal reports. Male guests waking with scratches. Female guests treated more gently, as if Faith seeks companionship rather than revenge. My article became something completely different than planned. The finger-shaped bruises on my throat took 2 weeks to fade, photographed and medically documented. I can't explain what happened using science. Can't dismiss it as hallucination or suggestion or marketing manipulation. Faith died heartbroken and betrayed, and her soul never left that room. She's still waiting for someone who promised to return and never did, still reliving her death, still seeking connection with the living guests who temporarily occupy her space. I think about how many women have died waiting for men who lied to them, how many souls are too stubborn or too broken to move on, how suffering can anchor someone to a location for eternity. Faith died waiting for someone who never came, but some spirits actively seek out victims. Running a paranormal investigation podcast means spending nights alone in allegedly haunted buildings, and after 4 years of doing this professionally, I developed a pretty thick skin about the whole ghost hunting thing. Jerome's Connor Hotel was supposed to be just another episode. Document some creaky floorboards, capture some dust orbs on camera, interview the owners about their ghost stories, package it all into entertaining content for my subscribers. I'd investigated dozens of locations across Arizona without encountering anything I couldn't explain with science and skepticism. The Connor Hotel management gave me full access for an overnight investigation in October. Keys to every room, permission to set up equipment wherever I wanted. The building's history is fascinating from a purely historical perspective. Built in 1898 by a guy who had the foresight to buy fire insurance, which saved him repeatedly as Jerome burned and rebuilt itself over and over during the mining boom years. The hotel operated successfully until 1931 when the mine started failing, then sat abandoned for decades before being renovated and reopened in 2000. Classic Arizona ghost town trajectory. I arrived around 10 p.m. with 3 camera bodies, EMF detectors, voice recorders, motion sensors, and a thermos of coffee strong enough to keep me alert through dawn. Started setting up equipment throughout the building, cameras in hallways, EMF detectors in rooms reported to have the most activity, voice recorders in the old bar area and upstairs guest rooms. The hotel is gorgeous. Honestly, original brick walls, period furnishings, that authentic Old West atmosphere that you can't fake with modern construction. Around midnight, after everything was recording, and I'd established baseline readings for electromagnetic fields and temperature, I started an EVP session in room 210. This is standard paranormal investigation protocol. You ask questions out loud, leave pauses for responses, and later review the audio to see if anything was captured that you didn't hear in real time. I've done this hundreds of times without getting responses more interesting than random noise patterns. Is anyone here with me? Can you make your presence known? Basic opening questions. The EMF detector on the second floor hallway suddenly started spiking. Readings jumping from normal background levels to significantly elevated numbers in a pattern that looked like something walking down the corridor. I checked the camera feed. Empty hallway. Nothing visible. But the EMF readings were moving in sequence, detector after detector lighting up like something electromagnetic was passing by each one. I followed the readings to room 210, where the door felt ice cold to the touch despite it being a comfortable October night. Opened the door, and the temperature inside was drastically colder than the hallway. I could see my breath fogging when I exhaled. Set up concentrated equipment in that room and continued the EVP session, asking more specific questions about who might be present and what they wanted. When I reviewed the audio later, my hands started shaking. The recorder had captured responses I absolutely did not hear in real time. A male voice saying, "Get out," with aggressive hostility. A child crying and saying something unintelligible. A woman's voice whispering, "Help us." Over 40 distinct voices recorded during that session speaking English and Spanish, some threatening, some pleading. I'm a skeptic by nature, but I couldn't explain those recordings as interference or environmental noise. Around 1 a.m., things escalated from interesting to terrifying. The rocking chair in the corner of room 210 started moving on its own. Gentle rocking at first, then accelerating to violent back-and-forth motion. No air current, no explanation. My full-spectrum camera, which captures wavelengths invisible to human eyes, showed a figure standing in the northeast corner. Bearded man, clothing from the 1920s era, just standing there completely motionless. When I looked at that corner with my naked eyes, nothing, only visible through the camera screen. My equipment started dying. Fresh batteries I'd installed before the investigation drained to zero in seconds. Cameras shut down one by one. EMF detectors went offline. The only device still working was my backup voice recorder, and it was capturing the sound of my increasingly panicked breathing as I realized I was trapped. The door to room 210 had closed and locked itself from the inside. The temperature dropped below freezing. Frost formed on the windows. I heard gunshots, multiple weapons, firing in rapid succession, echoing through the small room with a volume that made my ears ring. Historical records mention shootings in Jerome's hotels during the mining era. Violence over card games and women and insults. But these sounds were happening now, surrounding me in a locked room. Then I felt hands on my throat, ice-cold hands squeezing hard enough to cut off my breathing, choking me with strength that felt superhuman. I couldn't see anyone, couldn't fight back against an invisible attacker, just clawed at my own throat trying to break the grip. The sensation lasted maybe 30 seconds, but felt eternal. Absolute terror combined with oxygen deprivation and the understanding that something dead was trying to kill me. The door flew open. The hands released. I ran. Abandoned thousands of dollars of equipment, crashed down the stairs, burst into the lobby gasping and crying, called the hotel owner at 2 a.m, told them I was done. I was leaving. Something in that building had physically attacked me. They arrived within 20 minutes, didn't seem surprised, helped me collect my equipment with the understanding that I wouldn't go back upstairs alone. The owner told me what they don't advertise to guests. At least 12 people died in that building during its various incarnations as hotel, hospital, boarding house. Mining accidents brought bodies through those doors. Violence during Jerome's rough early years. A maintenance worker crushed by an elevator. Multiple tragic deaths from falls, shootings, and suicide. The bearded miner I captured on camera has been seen by over 50 different people. The second floor activity is consistent and documented. When I reviewed my camera footage the next day, I had 63 minutes of continuous recording showing things I couldn't see in person. Transparent figures walking through walls, the bearded man approaching the camera and pointing directly at the lens, and worst of all, video of me struggling against nothing while red marks appeared on my throat in the shape of handprints. Medical documentation confirmed the contusions, the pattern of manual strangulation visible for days afterward. My podcast episode about the Connor Hotel got more downloads than anything I'd ever produced. The evidence was compelling, the documentation scientific, the experience genuinely terrifying. But I paid for that content with nightmares that lasted months, psychological trauma that required therapy, and a permanent reluctance to investigate locations in Jerome. The 12 souls who died in that building don't want to be studied or filmed or made into entertainment. They want to be left alone with their anger and their suffering, and they'll use violence to enforce that boundary. I think about them often. The miners who died far from home, the women who worked in the bordellos and died forgotten, the maintenance worker whose death was ruled an accident, but whose ghost still seems angry about it. Their deaths trapped them in that building, and over a century later they're still there, still hostile, still capable of harming the living who intrude on their eternal confinement. At least hotel ghosts are confined to buildings, but some Arizona spirits haunt entire stretches of highway. "2:30 in the morning is when the desert highway belongs to ghosts and long-haul truckers, and after 4 years driving overnight routes through Arizona and New Mexico, I'd become comfortable with the solitude. Route 191 through Apache County was a regular run for me, Tucson to Farmington, hauling freight through darkness while the rest of the world slept. I knew every truck stop, every dangerous curve where the road twisted through canyon country, every place where cell service died and left you alone with just your thoughts and the endless asphalt disappearing into your headlights. People don't call it Route 666 anymore. They renamed it in 2003 after too many signs got stolen by collectors and devil worshippers and teenagers looking for souvenirs. But the locals still remember the old name, still call it Devil's Highway, still warn truckers about the stretch between mile markers 85 and 90, where things happen that can't be explained by mechanical failure or driver fatigue or bad weather. Mile marker 87. That's where I saw her standing on the shoulder with her thumb out, wearing a white dress that seemed to glow in my headlights. Long, dark hair hanging past her shoulders. No visible car or motorcycle or any explanation for how she'd gotten there. The nearest town was 20 miles behind me. No houses, no rest stops, nothing but creosote bushes and darkness in every direction. Just this woman hitchhiking at 2:30 a.m. in the middle of nowhere, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Every instinct I possess screamed, "Don't stop, keep driving. This is wrong," in ways you can't articulate, but you know in your bones. I've passed stranded people before and always felt guilty afterward, wondering if they made it home safely, wondering if I should have been the good Samaritan instead of the cautious coward. My girlfriend back in Tucson. I thought about how I'd want someone to stop if she was stranded somewhere dangerous. That thought made me slow down, made me pull the truck onto the shoulder, made me unlock the passenger door when she approached my window smiling. Her voice sounded wrong. Too quiet, too hollow, like it was coming from underwater or through thick glass. "Thank you for stopping," she said. "I need to get to Clifton, about 60 miles north. My car broke down back there." She gestured vaguely south, but there was no broken-down car visible, no hazard lights, no explanation that made sense. Still, I nodded and told her to climb in. Told myself I was doing the right thing. Told myself the weird feeling crawling up my spine was just paranoia. The temperature inside my cab dropped the moment she closed the door. I'm talking about going from comfortable late July warmth to seeing my breath fog in the air, frost forming on the inside of my windows despite the summer heat outside. She smelled like earth and decay, not like perfume or soap or anything associated with living people. When I glanced over at her, really looked at her for the first time, I noticed her eyes were completely black. No whites, no irises, just solid black from edge to edge like a shark's eyes. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I started driving, kept my speed steady, tried to stay calm while my brain screamed that something impossible was sitting 3 feet away from me in my truck. Attempted casual conversation. "Where are you from? What happened to your car? Do you need me to call anyone?" But she didn't respond. Just sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead, without blinking, without moving, without showing any signs of being an actual human being. Then she turned her head. Not like a person turns their head. Like an owl, rotating a full 180 degrees until she was facing completely backward while her body stayed forward, those black eyes locked onto mine. "You shouldn't have stopped," she whispered, and the truck started malfunctioning. Engines sputtering, lights flickering, steering wheel jerking in my hands like something was fighting me for control. I was doing 70 miles per hour on a dark highway and losing control of 18,000 pounds of truck and cargo. She started laughing. Not human laughter. The sound of metal grinding against metal, of nails on chalkboards, of something so fundamentally wrong that my body reacted with pure animal terror. The cab filled with the smell of burning rubber and sulfur. Her hands reached toward me, and they weren't hands anymore. Skeletal fingers showing bone through translucent skin, reaching for my face, for my throat. I screamed, slammed on the brakes with both feet, felt the truck skid sideways across both lanes, watched the edge of the road and the cliff beyond rushing toward us. The world became sound. Air brakes hissing, tires screaming, my own voice howling prayers I didn't know I remembered from childhood. The truck stopped inches from the embankment, teetered there for one impossible second, then settled back onto the road. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. I opened my eyes. When had I closed them? And looked at the passenger seat. Empty. Door still locked from the inside, but she was gone like she'd never existed. Except for the muddy footprints on my floor mat and the wet handprint on my dashboard that smelled like grave dirt and stagnant water. Physical evidence that something had been in my truck. Something that left traces. I stumbled out of the cab, vomiting in the dirt, hands shaking so badly I couldn't hold my phone steady to dial 911. Managed to gasp out my location, told them I'd almost died, told them something was in my truck. Arizona Highway Patrol arrived maybe 20 minutes later, felt like hours, and found me sitting on the ground rocking back and forth, unable to stop shaking. The officers told me what the locals already know. Route 191, former Route 6 has one of the highest accident fatality rates in Arizona, with over 400 deaths documented since the 1940s. Multiple truckers over the years have reported the same woman in white hitchhiking between mile markers 85 and 90, always at night, always alone. Drivers who pick her up either crash or narrowly avoid death. The lucky ones survive to tell the story. Some don't make it. Apache tribal elders say she's a vengeful spirit tied to the highway, punishment for travelers, collecting souls to feed the road's death toll. State police say it's mass hysteria, shared delusion, urban legend perpetuated by tired drivers hallucinating. But they can't explain the muddy footprints in my truck. Can't explain the handprint that laboratory analysis showed contained soil from a depth of 6 feet underground. Grave soil. I quit long-haul trucking 2 months later. Couldn't drive Route 191 again, couldn't handle overnight routes, couldn't shake the memory of those black eyes and that impossible head rotation. 400 souls died on that highway, their spirits tied to the asphalt, where they bled out in twisted metal and broken glass. The woman in white might be one of them, or something older. Something that existed before the highway was paved. Something that feeds on death and fear and the desperation of travelers stupid enough to stop. I see her sometimes in my dreams, standing on dark shoulders with her thumb out, smiling, waiting for the next Good Samaritan to make the fatal mistake of being kind. How many drivers see her each year? How many stop? How many make it out alive? I almost didn't. And that knowledge follows me every day, every night, every time I see headlights on a dark road and wonder what might be standing just beyond the light, waiting to climb into someone's car and drag them toward death. I escaped the highway ghost with my life, but one more location holds Arizona's darkest spirits. Photography is how I make sense of decay. Urban exploration, abandoned buildings, forgotten places where nature slowly reclaims what humans built. These spaces tell stories through peeling paint and shattered glass and the silence of absence. I document them before they disappear completely, before demolition crews erase history, before time finishes what abandonment started. Beautiful ruins. That's what I call them. That's what I thought Acadia Ranch Sanatorium would be. October in Oracle, Arizona. Perfect light, perfect temperature, perfect conditions for photographing the tuberculosis hospital that operated from 1928 to 1984 before abandonment left it slowly crumbling into desert sand. Hundreds of patients died there in the decades before antibiotics made TB treatable. I'd researched the history, found old medical records, read survivor accounts from the 1940s describing the horror of suffocating slowly, while doctors could only offer fresh air and sunshine and hope. 300 documented deaths, 47 of them children. The fence surrounding the property had no trespassing signs every 10 feet, but I'd trespassed before at dozens of locations. Legal gray area, ethical gray area, worth the risk for the photographs, for the documentation, for preserving something before it vanished. I found a gap in the chain link, squeezed through with my camera bag, and approached the massive multi-story structure that had housed dying patients for half a century. Gorgeous decay, windows broken but frames intact, graffiti covering some walls, but original architectural details still visible. Medical equipment rusting in corners, where it had been abandoned in 1984 when the facility finally closed. I shot everything. Patient wards with metal bed frames lined up like soldiers. The surgery room with ancient equipment gathering dust. Hallways where wheels once squeaked and footsteps once echoed, carrying desperate hope and inevitable grief. The children's ward stopped me. Tiny beds, toys scattered on the floor, a wooden horse, a rag doll, a toy truck, drawings on walls showing stick figures and crude houses, and childish attempts at capturing normalcy while death approached slowly. Fresh flowers on one of the small beds, wilted but recent, and a photograph, black and white image of a little girl from the 1940s, maybe 8 years old, smiling despite being photographed in a hospital gown. Someone had been visiting this room. Someone remembered the child in that photograph. Someone still cared 70 years after her death. The golden hour was approaching, that perfect late afternoon light photographer's chase. I wanted shots of the basement morgue before sunset, wanted that specific quality of light filtering through broken windows into darkness. Descended concrete stairs into cold that shouldn't exist in October desert heat, into darkness that felt heavier than simple absence of light, into a smell, mold and decay, and something organic that made my stomach clench. Metal examination tables, body drawers built into walls, instruments designed for autopsies when families needed cause of death documentation. I photographed everything, composing shots carefully, checking exposures, moving through the space with professional detachment. Then I heard them above me, children laughing, running footsteps crossing the floor directly overhead, multiple children playing in the abandoned building where no children should be. Called out, no response. Laughter stopped instantly. Silence more disturbing than the noise, because silence suggested awareness, suggested hiding, suggested something that could hear me and chose not to answer. I tried the basement door, jammed, stuck, wouldn't open despite having walked through it minutes earlier. Temperature dropped catastrophically. My breath fogging, frost forming on metal surfaces. In October, in Arizona. Impossible physics, impossible cold, and my camera started capturing things invisible to my naked eyes. Children on the viewfinder screen. Transparent children in hospital gowns from decades past, standing around me in the morgue, staring with hollow eyes that had seen death approach slowly through suffocation and blood and fear. 6 children, 7, 10, more appearing each second, crowding the small space, surrounding me with silent accusation or desperate pleading. I couldn't tell which, couldn't process what their expressions meant. Turned to look directly at them. Nothing there. Looked back at camera screen. Still visible. Children who existed only through electronic documentation. Children who died in this building when medicine couldn't save them and parents couldn't comfort them. And death came slowly enough that they understood what was happening. Their voices came next. Not laughter now, begging. Help us, we can't breathe. It hurts. Please make it stop. Why won't anyone help? We can't breathe. Overlapping voices. Children's voices filled with pain and confusion and the specific terror of suffocating while consciousness remains, while understanding remains, while the body fails and the mind watches. I started crying. Professional detachment shattered by the raw suffering in those voices, by the knowledge that these children died horrible deaths alone and scared and begging for help that never came. They'd been dead for decades, but their souls remained trapped in the building where they'd suffered, replaying their deaths eternally, still begging for intervention that was 80 years too late. A nurse's voice cut through the children's pleas. Visiting hours are over. Cold, stern, authoritative. The basement door unlocked with an audible click and swung open. I ran, abandoned my tripod, my lens cap, my professional composure. Ran up those stairs with ghost children's voices following me. Ran through hallways that had changed. The building looked different through my camera viewfinder. Not abandoned. Operational. Full of people, patients in beds, nurses in 1940s uniforms, doctors making rounds, all going about their routines as if the sanatorium was still functioning, as if 1984 hadn't happened, as if the building had never closed. I was running through the past, seeing the hospital as it existed during its operational years, seeing the dead continuing their routine 70 years after their final breaths. Burst through the main entrance into darkness. Full night. Impossible. I'd entered during late afternoon golden hour. Hours had passed, though it felt like minutes. Time had fractured. Had slipped sideways while I was in the morgue with the children. Drove away, shaking so violently I almost crashed twice. Reviewed my photographs later that night and found hundreds of images showing transparent figures, children, patients, nurses, staff, all visible in the frames, all looking at the camera, all aware they were being documented. Some photos showed the building as abandoned. Others showed it as operational, fully furnished, occupied by the dead continuing their existence. Contacted paranormal researchers who confirmed what I'd discovered. Acadia Ranch is one of Arizona's most actively haunted locations. Over 300 patients died there, including 47 children. The building is scheduled for demolition next year. When it's destroyed, the researchers wonder what will happen to the souls trapped inside. Whether demolition will free them or just trap them in rubble. I can't delete the photographs, even though looking at them destroys me. Those 47 children died gasping for air, alone, terrified, in a building in the middle of the desert far from their families. Their souls never left. They're still in the children's ward, still suffering, still begging for help that never comes. When the building is demolished, I hope it finally frees them. Hope their souls can rest. Hope they stop reliving those horrible deaths. But I suspect demolition won't free them. Suspect they'll remain in the desert sand where the building stood, forever trapped in the place where they died. Forever 8 years old and suffocating and scared. 300 souls in that sanatorium. 47 of them children who deserved better than slow death and eternal imprisonment. For those who didn't make it home, for the children who died begging for breath, for all the lost souls in Arizona's haunted places, may they find peace. Thank you for listening to our stories, and may your soul stay your own.